conversation as possible about anything revenue management. So welcome to the Art of Pricing. My name is Talia. Today we have Jesse, founder of Simplify, with us. And I'm sure virtual CFO, many hats, loves finance, accounting, everything from my little bit of chats I've had with him. Then we have Karen Fleck, who's the CFO of Rented, with us, pretty much just the girl Jessie. They both really love numbers. And then we have Cliff Johnson, our CCO at Rented, past co-founder of Vacasa, who is going to basically hold the property management seat today for us whenever we are going through the different chats. So the title of this today was, how do fixed versus variable expenses impact your revenue strategy? So I think to get this started, what are fixed and variable expenses? I mean, I think it makes sense the most. Karen, do you want to take us off?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. So fixed expenses are those expenses you have, even if you have a renter in the home or you don't. You signed up for them, you have to pay them. Some examples of those would be your mortgage, your internet, insurance, real estate taxes, if you have any association fees, all those types of expenses. Whereas variable expenses are the ones that will go up or become an expense if you have a renter in the home. So for example, your electricity bill, you'll have it even if you don't have anyone in the home, but it'll be a lot higher if you have a renter in. Other things there would be your OTAs, so any fees that you pay to Airbnb or Verbo, any of those, your PMS charges, if you have any cleaning fees, etc. And I think the other thing, just to point out quick, is some of those fees, such as any fee that you would pay to an OTA or Airbnb, as an example, will be a percentage of your income. So if you have a renter in for $50 a night or $500, it'll be a percentage of that income.
Awesome. Thanks for breaking that out for us. I felt like I was intimidated by this topic originally whenever we were said that we were going to dive into it. And I even told Jesse and Karen that yesterday. And after the talk, I felt a little bit better. And I was like, maybe I know a lot more than I thought I did. With that being said, the topic we said is, this came up because one of the most common things we hear is that they don't want to take bookings. A manager or an owner doesn't want to take bookings, mainly an owner, because they're scared they're going to lose money. And I was baffled to think when I asked, I was like, so does this mean that basically somebody is taking all their expenses, dividing it by a 30-day night in the month and saying, if the ADR doesn't hit that amount, that amount, then I'm losing money. I don't want, that I'm going to lose money on the booking, creating pretty high minimum restrictions with that. And Jesse, you had a really great insight whenever I was asking, like, am I understanding this correctly? What were your thoughts there?
Yeah, well, as Karen just alluded to, the fixed expenses are something that are going to be there whether or not you have them or not. And therefore, it really doesn't have much bearing on what your price is going to be, because first of all, the marketplace has no idea what your fixed utility expense is, and so they're not going to take that into consideration when they're thinking about, hey, what are they going to spend on your home. And so when we think also, but then on the flip side, okay, hey, what really should go into my pricing decisions? Not to say that you don't ignore and you don't understand and know what your fixed expenses are, so that you have targets in order to cover those fixed costs. But it's really those variable costs that end up being your floor. The reason is because if my variable costs are $50 Well, anything over $50 essentially is contributing to covering those fixed costs. And one of the biggest things that I always talk about with folks in thinking about pricing is that it's very similar to oil futures. Trying to purchase and think about, hey, I'm going to buy oil in the future. Or probably one that we're all a little bit more familiar with is, hey, buying an airplane ticket into the future. And so thinking and using tools in order to come up with that the market value, which the market value is driven by supply and demand, and not dwelling so much on those fixed expenses when determining that variable cost or that dynamic pricing, I'm sorry, for your rental property.
Totally. And that was a really good point that I hadn't even thought of, right? So, if you have two properties that are like exactly the same, right next to each other, but somebody, and Cliff brought this point up, one paid more just because of supply and demand, prices based off supply and demand. And so they feel their prices should be higher than their neighbor. The traveler doesn't know that you paid double the person on the side of you, and they don't care that you did. So you need to have, whenever you're setting your pricing based on your expenses and expenses that are there, it's relative to the market data, not to technically your own data.
Right.
Cliff, do you want to expand upon that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one of the things that we saw as the lease arbitrage model was used more frequently, and that's basically called fixed rent or something, many different things. But basically, when you're leasing a property and then re-renting it as a vacation rental. So there are a lot of companies that do this, like Sonder and Lyric was in that space for a while before they wound down. And there's still a lot of companies out there that do that. And it's something that we would hear, it's like, oh, we're paying $1,800 a month for this property. We need to get at least 60 a night for that, which is same logic, which it's, even though this is not the owner in that case, it's the manager that's doing that. Once you've committed to paying that $1,800 per month, that's a sunk cost. And so I think as you start to think around fixed costs, thinking which of those are also sunk fixed costs, which is another level of that, and versus controllable, meaning if I have a fixed cost for internet, as an example, maybe it's a month-to-month contract, and if I'm not this is a bad example because everybody should have internet. Cable might be a better example, where cable is maybe not as necessary as it used to be because more people are comfortable using Netflix or whatever it is. So if you start Comcast keeps jacking up your cable bill and it's now $200 a month or something like that, and you don't feel like you're getting the incremental value back for that $200 a month that you're spending on Comcast, those are the type of fixed expenses that you might look at and say, well, I'm going to take this 200 and get rid of it. I'm going to, set the property up with Roku and something else so that, and you kind of have to time that so that the guests, make sure your future guests that are already booked are not expecting cable and not going to get it. But that's a controllable fixed expense. Whereas if you have a contract on a lease and you're paying, that $2,000 per month for the next 11 months, you can't just go back to the owner and say, hey, I'm going to pay you $1,500 because I'm making less money this month. So that's a sunk cost you're going to incur no matter what. You want to make up as much as you can, as long as you're getting incremental profit out of it, essentially. So that's where getting down to what is the true incremental cost of each night is really important. And it changes by the time of the year. So one of my favorite areas to spend time with owners is the energy efficiency side. For a lot of owners, they're worried, if you have a house in Maine in the winter, you're worried about the heat cost for an incremental night. And that's a legitimate concern. So there's a lot of times where investing in a more energy efficient heating system might really pay for itself in a vacation rental environment where your guests really aren't thinking through the lens of a homeowner because they're not paying that utility bill. So I don't know, I threw a lot at you, Talia. Sorry. I started by just going down that road a little bit around thinking of where these different fixed expenses happen and which ones, there are those differences and the nuances around stuff you're just obligated. You got to pay your mortgage. You have to pay property taxes. That kind of stuff's not really going to change. But there are these decisions you make on what amenities you want to offer and what services you want to provide.
Totally. Yeah. I completely followed everything you said. I'm just kidding.
Well, I think that also it goes into a big thing, which is understanding all of your expenses and ensuring that you are looking at them, you know what they are. Is it something that is helping you bring in more revenue? Is it something helping you cut other expenses? Is it something you just have to have? I've met a lot of people, and I'm sure Jesse has in our jobs who don't look at their expenses and then end up having, you know, all these charges that are on credit cards happening every month or every 6 months or whatever it is that I don't even see. And it's things that I don't have to have. So truly understanding what they all are. And honestly, you can look at your bank account. I look at ours every day. Take a half an hour every Friday, open up your bank account, open up your credit card statement and just see what's on there. Is there anything on here that I don't know what is or isn't helping us anymore? I know a lot of this stuff can seem overwhelming. So if you're taking it in small areas at a time, it hopefully is easier.
Or you can hire us to do it for you.
You're right.
That's true. You could do that
Exactly.
also.
That was exactly, you know, where the segue where I was going to kind of go from what Cliff was saying is, you know, understanding your expenses and, you know, how they fall and segmenting them together. And, you know, it seems like it's kind of just like revenue management. I'm still kind of floored by how much all this really, really pertains to revenue management and how Jesse and I explain, like Jesse explains through his company the exact same things we do. But how often do you think that a property manager should be basically reviewing this for their properties? Because it sounds like your expenses can often change and you need to be aware of it. This shouldn't be just like a once a year you're looking at your fixed versus variable expenses and in terms of your profitability or ROI. I mean, it should be pretty often, right?
Yeah. Well, certainly, you know, our expectation is for all of our clients, and so people know, we provide, you know, outsourced accounting services for somewhere around 3,000 to 4,000, you know, different homes, with obviously lots of different property managers, and certainly. At least they're getting a monthly understatement. Some of our clients, we actually do semi-monthly understatements, and so, you know, that's on the owner side. What to me actually sometimes is a little so the understatements are really good about, right? Property managers are really good about making sure their owners get the right money. At least most of them really try, because
the owners will find the managers otherwise.
Right,
So
they understand the importance. The flip side of it is that too often property managers don't understand their own finances. They don't understand their own fixed costs and variable costs, et cetera. And so, you know, to your point of reviewing that on a regular basis, we really try to provide an environment through integrating with property management systems and accounting systems, so they have real-time data. We really want people to be looking at a dashboard every day, at least once a week, to understand the performance of their company. And then obviously we're reviewing that on a monthly basis. Something that I think really, really helps property managers or owners to understand really this whole connection between dynamic pricing of their home and variable cost and then fixed cost is going through a forecasting or budgeting and planning exercise. And not to bore people too much, but you know, we always start with that top line. Hey, what is going to be my target price per month on average throughout the year? What's my occupancy? Okay, great. Now I've got my gross revenue. Now I can step back from that. I can think about what revenues are going to be connected to that: cleaning, maintenance revenues, et cetera. Usually you can kind of have an idea. Okay, I'm going to have a percentage of cleaning revenue, maintenance revenue, maybe damage insurance, et cetera. It's going to be connected to that revenue. Next comes all of my costs associated with that revenue. And so now I start to learn my relationships between my gross revenue, my gross rental revenue, and my variable costs, which are largely my direct costs. And then you get down to your fixed costs and start going through, hey, what's my payroll? What's my marketing and advertising expense? What's my software expense? How much of those are variable, and how much are those, are truly fixed?
Mhm.
And working through that exercise with property managers, I just find that they really start to understand and learn the relationships of their P&L with pricing and gross revenue.
Totally, that makes sense, and I would even want to stretch that to say, you're saying like the what and the how, like what is your target? How are we going to get there? Should they be thinking about the why? Because if you have a target, why is that your target? Is your target that because you're trying to pay your expenses? Are you trying to save for a kid's college, retirement? Are you trying to just break even? Kind of knowing what your owners want. That's probably pretty important in trying to decide what you're going to do with your strategy.
Yeah, although I'm not so sure that the why comes into the market, right? Because and
True,
the reason why
true.
I say
Not data.
the reason why I say that is because the market doesn't really give a damn if you if you're saving for college or not, right? The market, what really we should be thinking about is, how am I just going to maximize my revenue? That's the
Mhm.
first thing that we want to do. How do I maximize my revenue? Which really comes back obviously to dynamic pricing. And I brought up the airline earlier, because what's an airline doing? An airline is constantly looking at data, looking at booking data, looking at other airlines pricing, etc., to determine, hey, what should the price be for a flight 6 months from now?
Mhm.
And so they're using all that data and crazy logarithms and all the things that Rented provides from a software perspective to provide dynamic pricing to maximize their revenue into the future, either adjusting that price
Right.
up or down. And so really it doesn't, probably the why question needs to come into, hey, why am I going to invest in this vacation rental property? That's probably where the why comes in. But I think once you've invested, now the next step is, hey, I just want to maximize revenue. And then obviously then the next step is, hey, how do I do that? Dynamic
Right.
pricing. And then I want to maximize profits, and that's by controlling expenses. I think that's really what it comes to. How do I maximize revenue?
Totally. I think that's great. Whenever I even said the why, I think I'm thinking more of like the owner expectation side. So if you're like deciding a strategy of it, and we are going, and it's assuming everyone wants to maximize profits, which why wouldn't you? But for some reason, sometimes you hear people who are just, that's not the top dollar is not always the most important to them. But that's a whole different whole different webinar for another day.
I think it comes into play though, because we always, when we do a forecast for a property, we always
Mhm.
start with optimizing revenue, with maximizing the value of the property. So if I don't have any information about a property and I'm just putting together a forecast on it, I'll assume it's pet friendly. I assume that they're not going to restrict minimum nights. I assume that they're not going to have a minimum rate, because I want to start with the world in which they're not artificially inhibiting their ability to earn revenue. And then typically what ends up happening, to Talia's point on the why, is that the owner may have bought it more for personal reasons or more for investment reasons. And if it's more for personal reasons, they end up caring a bit more about asset preservation, which then comes down to how strong is the quality of care on the management side. Because in a perfect world, you don't know whether a guest has been in the house or not if you go from one time to the next, because it's set up perfectly, and any maintenance that needed to be done between steps has been done. It's cleaned thoroughly. In fact, like having a property rented more frequently oftentimes results in the property being cared for better, because it's being done more proactively. But
Mhm.
that's not the perception that a lot of owners have going into it. The perception is the more the house is used, the more it's going to get worn down and the more costs there will be. And so usually when I kind of go from the bottom up and figure out what is that true incremental cost of hosting a reservation with the owner, I will factor in their perception of wear and tear and try to really use that as a way to kind of get them to understand that their perception is probably much higher than an actual cost
Mhm.
is. So
Would it
if
be
you look
awesome
at
to
making
have
it
some
even,
data
yeah.
on showing like the wear and tear on a property on a short-term rental versus a long-term rental? Because I mean, just from like talking to people and like knowing a lot of people who have rental properties that are long-term versus short-term, I way more often hear a landlord say, what the upkeep on a property is a long-term versus a short-term, but the perception is vice versa in our
Oh
industry.
yeah. Well, it's just, I mean, you have somebody in there cleaning it every few days and managing it and fixing it. When you have somebody in there that's long term, I mean, how often does a landlord walk into a long-term property and inspect it and
Right.
clean it and make sure it's all taken care of? I mean, yeah, and not only that, but a good property manager, and I find that the majority of them are very interested in having a home. It's their perception, right? When
Mhm.
that first impression, when somebody walks into a home, how clean it is, how kept it is, etc., that's your reputation. And
Mhm.
so a property manager is really going to work hard to make sure that that is top of the line,
Right.
or best that it can be.
Let's be honest, most short-term rentals are probably cleaner than our primary homes, or mine at least, I guess.
I mean, is there any question about that? I mean, how many times have we? I mean, have you ever? I mean, I hope nobody's walked into a short-term rental and said, "Man, this is dirtier than my house." I mean, if that was the case, I've
I'm
got
sure
four
it's
kids.
happened, but not with anybody on this
All
call.
right,
So,
I know. So I definitely, I
um,
wanted to, with our last, like, we have 8 minutes, and there's like two things that I wanted to cover with that. And, we were talking about things to look at. If you have a target and you're not hitting your target number, what are things that you should be looking at?
I think I can start there too. I think as everyone has said before, the market is going to tell you what you're able to price in an area, but in there, there's still room too. So it is important to go out and see the market data. What are other rentals in your area and going forward, but then also look at things like pictures, which we had an awesome webinar on last week. If you haven't heard it, listen to. Are there any upgrades that have to happen? Are there areas where you can spend money that'll actually help you increase revenue? So I think it's super important. Don't be afraid of expenses, because there are things that you can do that'll help. For example, hot tubs. Oftentimes, if you add a hot tub, it'll increase your revenue a lot, especially if it's the only one in the area. Or things like, I know StayFi is a company that can help with, having marketing. So it can help with your reviews and other things that is good, because you can test it out and see if it's helping or it isn't helping. So don't be afraid of expenses, but also don't lock yourself into anything if you don't feel like it'll help income in the long.
I would, like to, add on to that. Don't be afraid of, like, think outside the box, right? Because you got a hot tub, if you're like, the revenue is not coming, it's not generating the revenue I thought it would. Are you advertising that you have a hot tub the right way? If you switch from cable to Netflix, which I think is a huge thing that in vacation rentals that'll make things a little bit easier for people today, is, are you advertising what entertainment you have in your TV? So just because you have the expense or the new amenity or commodity that's going to help your property, make sure you are marketing it the way that it should, the way that's going to capture attention. Because just like travelers don't know the price of your house, they don't just know what's automatically in there. You need to use the resources that you have to be able to for them to be able to capture that and see that like in a listing. And we actually had a question that kind of pertains to this from Daniel. He's asking Jesse, should marketing be associated as a variable cost, since the expense percentage in marketing is tied to the revenue? And how much of that revenue should be allocated to marketing?
I guess the only thing that I'll say to Daniel, the only thing I'm a little confused on the question is, I don't see marketing typically as a percentage of revenue. I mean, sometimes I'll see, let's say, pricing, you're paying a fixed price on pricing, or maybe you're paying a small percentage to your OTAs.
Yeah, I think he's referring to OTAs most likely.
Right. And so,
right.
yeah, so that is a variable cost. I typically don't think about that as an advertising. And as an advertising expense as much as I do actually a software expense. Usually that's how we categorize that. Probably can make the argument
For
either way.
distribution, right? I mean, like, I guess it depends on
Right.
what marketing can be so much.
Yeah, I think of advertising and marketing. I think really as okay, email campaigns. Maybe I'm hiring somebody to manage my marketing, social media, advertising, all of those. True. Some people I think use places like Blue Tent. In investing in your website. I think of those as my true advertising and marketing expense. And typically I see those more as a fixed expense than I do a percentage of revenue or a variable cost. And one of the things that I see is like, hey, what should I budget for marketing? I will tell you that what I typically provide as a kind of benchmark for people to use is somewhere, depending on how aggressive you want to be, but your marketing budget should be about 2.5% to 7.5%. 7.5% is probably pretty high, probably 2.5% to 5% of your target rental revenues is a good place to start as your budget for marketing. And it's really, hey, what if my target revenue is $1 million, your goal should be spending around $25,000 a year in marketing. So anyway, I find that to be kind of a barometer for what you should be spending.
Totally. And Daniel, if you want to elaborate on the question, you know how to get in touch with me, so we can talk a little bit more about that later. So we can totally do that. So we have 3 minutes left in this, and I do want to let everyone know that we have already asked Jesse if he would write a guest blog post that's going to expand upon this topic that we will share in the next couple of weeks. So if you want more, we're hoping that we'll be able to give you more. I'm sure Jesse will. So to end it, what are some of like the top 1 to 3 things you think that, are overlooked in this area whenever, managers either get started or just overlooked in general?
I'd start like kind of coming back to the last question too. I think the biggest thing is, are there no cost improvements you can make? For me, the easiest one was going no pets to pet friendly. And so if you have data to support that, really on both sides, like both on revenue generation, which is a little easier to show, like if you have pet friendly properties that are doing really well, and on the cost of maintenance. Because one of my favorite lines that Ty's heard a lot is that people will bring their bad kids and their bad relatives, but they generally leave the bad pets behind. Not always, but they bring the bad pets less frequently than the bad relatives.
Well, you can't leave the bad kids behind. It's hard.
No, you can't. You could get a babysitter, I guess. And so
more cost.
That's the one side is on that. The other thing I look at is like bed configurations and stuff like that. Like, what is your occupancy? Are you maximizing the potential on that side? And are you making it comfortable for people? Because you can market, it sleeps 10 and there's 5 futons. And like, well, that's not ideal, So instead, think about do you have a comfortable structure that actually sleeps the number that you have? And are you conveying that through photos, not through the description? Because people do not read the description, as we talked about on the photos webinar last week.
Nice. And in our last minute, I'm going to ask Jesse, what are the top 2 or 3 things that you tell people that they need to understand to maximize their revenue?
Well, they need to understand their market. They need to understand. So I guess that ties into understanding their client. But they also need to understand, to Cliff's point is, or kind of getting into what Cliff was talking about is, hey, if you have great beds and bedding, et cetera, and your configuration is maximized, and so someone walks in your home and it's comfortable, are you comparing yourself to your competitors, right? Those are the things we just talked about. Pricing is all about supply and demand. So demand comes from the customer. The supply is who are your competitors. And so if you really want to understand and maximize your revenues, understand those 2 things. And I'll just finish with, obviously, find somebody that specializes in pricing to help you get there, because it's just not something To be honest, I don't even do it. I work with companies like Rented with my clients to do this. It's not something that I try to take on myself because there's a lot to it. I don't price oil futures either. So that's kind of how it goes.
And Karen, is there anything that you wanted to add to end everything?
Yeah, I think I would just say understand your expenses and what they are, and don't be afraid of having expenses, but also don't be so overwhelmed by it you aren't looking at all. Because there have been people who think you're doing awesome and you're bringing in a ton of money, and then you add on all the expenses and you aren't bringing in as much as you thought you were.
Totally.
So yeah.
And my takeaway is just, like if this seems like an overwhelming topic for you, reach out to companies like Jesse Exemplify that can help you in some of this, overwhelming, I was overwhelmed coming into this talk. Get organized, right? And some people are just helping you to get organized and to understand what it is, to help you get or what your next steps will be for the future. So we are, excited that we were able to have. Thank you, Jesse, for joining us today, and Karen and Cliff, for taking time out of your busy schedule. Next week we will be talking about event pricing, and so just going back onto the supply and demand and how to take a look at that. So definitely would love for everyone to join us then, and we will share this recording when we have it out in Jesse's blog so that you can learn more. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, and have a great day. Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
So, yeah, thank you.